came after, so now you need to add to. Well, you can't add to a covenant. It's done and it's sealed. So he goes back to the beginning and he says, let's go take a look at Abraham. This is a covenant. Can't be annulled, can't be amended, can't be changed. That's where we kind of left off last week. Now, not only can it not be annulled and it not be changed, but this covenant has already been completed by Christ. Because the promise, remember, Brother Jerry, the promise was, I promised the seed, not seeds. The whole world is going to be blessed by the seed of Abraham. And that seed was Christ, and he's already come, and this is what we believed in. This was the grace that was given to you. This is what changed your life. This is what started these churches. So he rolls them back to this picture. Now that brings us to where we're going to be and where we're going to start this morning. Galatians chapter 3, verses 19. Actually, he deals with this next section. Because if you get to that place, here you go, Miss Pat. You know, I don't know if you know this. I'm kind of sarcastic. Did you know that? This is your part where you say, no, I am kind of sarcastic, so I can picture this exactly right. Here they are, and they're sitting there saying, okay, big shot. Tell me this then. Why the law? If it was all about the promise, and if there was no need, was God just sitting up there saying, hey, these guys need something to do, let's give them law? Why the law? Here we go. Maybe it's not the 10 commandments, it's just the 10 suggestions. And so that's the question he has to answer. That's the picture he gets, and he's answering it before it gets asked, which, by the way, is always good counsel. Don't depend on the question to be asked. You got to find out where they are, like the great passage dealing with husband and wife, dwell with them according to knowledge. You better have the knowledge. Answer the question first. That's what Paul's doing here. Great picture of leadership. Verse 19. Wherefore then serveth the law? Okay? You may ask, why then the law? He goes ahead and answers it. It was added because of transgressions, till the seed should come, to whom the promise was made, and it was ordained by angels in the hand of a mediator. Now a mediator is not a mediator of one, but God is one. Is the law then against the promises of God? God forbid. For if there had been a law given which could have given life, verily righteousness should have been by the law. But the scriptures concluded all under sin, that the promise by faith of Jesus Christ might be given to them that believe. Now that's as far as we're going to get. Hopefully we get that far. Paul's answer to this question, why then the law, begins right here in verse 19. And it begins by examining the purpose of the law. Okay, you want to ask why the law? Well, I'm going to answer it. First, the law is important because it was added because of transgressions. That's why it existed. The law's purpose was never to make you righteous. It was never to make you holy. In fact, this idea that you obey the law to be good is a twist. The law came for one reason. Because of transgressions. It came, what does that mean? The law came to make sin a legal offense. You can't just say like, oh, okay, I just messed up. No, it's sin. It's a transgression. You've transgressed. You've moved from this side to this side. It now needs a legal judgment. The law's purpose, law is law, it's legal, to make your transgression, to make sin requirement of punishment. It came to reveal, to expose, to shed light on the fact that man is sin. Sarcastic. Are you saying that before the law, man didn't know that they were sinners? No, of course they were. But this is what they did. Just like if we're not careful what we do. Miss Kathy, what they did is say, well, you know, I messed up. I didn't really handle that well. But basically, I'm a good guy. I care about people. I do things the right way. I'm not out there doing all those bad things. So, you know, God understands. The law came to say this. Do the best you can. It's not good enough. It is legal. It is law, and it is legal. It requires judgment. Judgment is sin, when it is finished, brings forth death. Every time, no exception. Transgression, then, is the revealing of a legal offense, and it leaves us without hope, without God, deserving punishment. Sound good? Tony, that sounds like hellfire. Well, you know why? Because you know what the law is? It's hellfire. Let's cuddle up to that. I want to be back under law. That's what it is. Did you get those verses? Give me Romans 3:20. Oh, you did? Therefore, by the deeds of the law, purpose of the law, there shall no flesh be justified in his sight. For by the law is the knowledge of sin. That's why law came. Give me this. Give me the next one. Oh, actually, you got verse 21 and 22 just because these are great verses. 21. But now the righteousness of God without the law is manifested. Now that Christ came, now that there's a seed, now that the promise has been fulfilled, the righteousness of law is manifested, being witnessed by the law and the prophets. Well, next one. Oh, did you give me? Even the righteousness of God, which is by faith of Jesus Christ. There you go. There's the seed right there. Let's go on to chapter 5, verse 20. Moreover, the law entered. This is why the law came, that the offense might abound where sin abounded. Grace did much more abound. Whoa. The law came that there could be more sin. The law came that sin could abound. Oh, well, sort of, I guess. The law came that sin might abound, meaning this, Dr. Lewis, you and I could see it more. We know what sin is. When it gets revealed, we get to see more and more and more and more. I am not a good guy anymore. That good guy who thought he was doing the right things and that God would understand, go, understand this. Every time you open your eyes, you see more and more and more. Romans 7:7. What shall we say then? Is the law sin? God forbid. Nay, I had not known sin, but by the law. Purpose of the law? To reveal sin. 7:13. Was then that which is good made death unto me? God forbid. But sin, that it might appear sin. There's the purpose of the law. The law came that sin might look like sin, because it's working death in me. So, the purpose of the law is that we might see it. So now I see it. Now I get to strive really hard to get it, right? I strive really hard to make sure that I obey the law, and I obey every law, and I'm doing it all right, and life becomes nothing but work and effort to strive and to work and to make sure and to separate and to be pure, and because I've got to obey the law. Anybody who thinks that doesn't understand the totality of the law. We could go to Exodus chapter 20, and we could read the Ten Commandments, and that would be tough enough if you spend any time to actually think you're keeping all of the Ten Commandments. But we could then go on to chapter 21, where it gives us law about slavery. It gives us laws about personal injury. Chapter 22 gives us laws about property damage, about dishonesty, about immorality. It keeps going. Gives us laws about civil and religious responsibilities. It gives us laws about Sabbaths, about feasts. And then if you think you keep all those, go on to the book of Leviticus. The purpose of the law is to come that we might see that there is nothing we can do, that legally we are doomed. That's what the law comes. The law came that we might say, I have no hope, I'm without God. And if you think you did all of those things in Exodus, and you did all of those things in Leviticus, then Christ comes in Matthew chapter 5, and he says, you say you've never murdered, but I say, did you think evil? Did you get angry? Did you get upset? Then you murderer. The purpose of the law is not to make us clean. The purpose of the law is to result in us being hopeless. Man twisted the law. What God gave to prove us sinful, we grab hold of and try to make it prove us holy. Here's your list. Do them. You're good. To which Paul screams to these churches, foolish, bewitched Galatians. The law is just a mirror. It just reveals. It has no power to change anything. Look in the mirror. You ugly. Doesn't make you pretty. At no point, by the way, can we obey enough law that we can clean ourselves. Last week, preacher stood right up there, or maybe it was down here. He was down here a lot last week. I don't know if you noticed that. Camera guys probably did. But last week, Brother Moyer last week, he sat right here and he said, David, remember King David, the man after God's own heart? After his sin with Bathsheba? You would think godly sorrow worketh repentance. If anybody, there was repentance right there. There was brokenness. There was real sorrow in David right there. Don't you think? Good, me too. But still, what did David pray? God, you restore. God, you wash. God, you clean. God, you create. Because David knows he can't. And that's the purpose of the law. The purpose of the law is to send us running to God. Verse 19, wherefore then serveth the law? It was added because of transgressions, comma, until the seed should come. Verse 22 tells us what that is. But the scripture hath concluded all under sin, that the promise by faith of Jesus Christ might be given to them that believe, until the seed comes. You know where I am? Law, under law. Again. I don't know. Under law, I am sentenced. It's just waiting. And you can say it's waiting, but I have no hope here. I'm doomed. But the seed, the promise, faith, grace, salvation, talks about it right here in the very next verse. Romans 4:25. You got that, Eric? Who was delivered for our offenses and was raised again for our justification. That's the seed. Give me the next one, 5:1. Therefore, being justified by faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ. Here's the difference. Law, condemnation. Promise, peace. Justification. Romans 8:1-2. Now, we're going to look at this next week a little bit, but I want to put it out there, set it up. We're not getting there now. Romans 8. This is him typing really fast. Or not. There is now, therefore, no condemnation. You got 2? For the law of the Spirit of life. That's what we're going to look at in a little bit. We won't get there today, Brother Howard. But the answer is, as soon as you start talking about, because this is under law until. Okay, well, if you've been saved, you're in the until group. You're no longer under law. We're no longer under law. All of us who are saved are no longer under law. The law is bondage. The law's purpose is condemnation. There is now, therefore, no condemnation. I am not under law. The law's purpose never changes. Its purpose is condemnation. That brings up, if we're not under law, well, what then? We get a little tip right there. For the law of the Spirit. Yeah, we're not under law anymore. But we're supposed to walk in accordance to the Spirit. And that's a big difference, which we'll get to as we get into the second piece of this puzzle, which will be next week. So sometimes Doug, I get nervous doing this. I really do, because sometimes people hear it and they just say, I just love that you're talking about grace. You know, we should talk about grace more. You know, they throw out some word. I heard that we're no longer under the dispensation of law, and we're now under the dispensation of grace. And I've read the books, and I understand, and I understand the picture, and I'm really not trying to be sarcastic and make fun of it, but I do struggle with a little bit, Dr. Lewis. Even if you go back to innocence, you know, before law, in innocence, you know what kept them saved? They believed God. And under law, what got them saved? They believed and had faith. And after the seed came, what do we have? Belief and faith. So they start talking about this big change. I don't see this big change. In fact, it never changed. So when they start, I just wish you would talk about, people would talk about grace more, and I hate hearing about the law. Well, I don't want to be that person, because Christ preached the law. In fact, his sermon is about the law. The law is supposed to send men running to Christ. You must preach the law. The law brings condemnation. Salvation through faith says there is now therefore no more condemnation. So let's not twist it and put yourself back underneath the law. That's what we're dealing with here. 2 quick verses, because where I want to spend all my time this morning is in verse 21. We haven't even got there yet. 2 quick verses. We'll go through these real quick. Till the seed should come through the promise was made, and it was ordained by angels in the hand of a mediator. This gets confusing sometimes, Doug. Sometimes people will be like, what is this? This is talking about the law and how it came. I know how the law came. The law came, God came, he wrote it with his finger, and he gave it to Moses. Where's this talk about mediator and angels and stuff? Okay, well, this like big picture. Like you could tell me that as principal, you had this done. I don't know whether you did it, secretary did it, a coach did it, an athletic director did it. I know you, as the principal, had this done. So, without 2 verses in the Bible, and this one, it would be easy for us to think, Dr. Lewis, that God, with his very own hands, took these things and handed them to Moses. Except for there's 2 verses, and this one, which says that's not how it happened. Here's the first one, Acts chapter 7. Who received the law by the disposition of angels. And then I'll give you this other one, Hebrews chapter 2, verse 2. For if the word, how'd it come from? By angels was steadfast, and every transgression and disobedience received just recompense of the reward. I don't know. I just know this. Somewhere, God used angels to give the law. How do I know that? Because there's 3 places in the Bible that tell me that. And I don't have a problem with it. Because think of this, Heather, think of this picture. Law, you know where it came? You know, Mount Sinai. Boom, send them back, keep them far away, don't want them, put water, it's scary, don't come close. Contrast that to the promise. No mediator, God face to face with Abraham. It's intimate. Grace is close, it's loving. Law is condemning, and its purpose is to separate. That's what I'm illustrating here. And then he goes on to talk about that promise in that weird verse. Now a mediator is not a mediator of one. Simple. If you go to a mediator, you know what you got? 2 parties. He's trying to decide between the 2 parties. But in the promise, there was only one party. Who did God promise? God promised to God. He did not make a promise and compact with Abraham. Who's to hold him accountable? Who walked down there in the covenant? God and God. So there is no need of mediator, showing the difference, showing how that in this area that law is limited, but that promise and grace is not. Now, here's where I want to spend some time. Verse 21. Is the law then against the promises of God? Brother Jerry, we kind of rushed through that, and I got to tell you, I do struggle a little bit. Maybe should have slowed down. That's very important doctrine. But it comes up to this. This is what we're talking about. Promise, law. Okay, that works out like this. Not you, because I want it done well. Donnie, I'll give you $1,000 if you come and clean up my backyard. You know what that is? That's a contract. That's if you, then I. Okay? Opposite. I have $1,000 right here. You want it? They don't look the same. Okay, one looks a whole lot better, doesn't it? If you saw my backyard, it looks a whole lot better. One's a whole lot better. They're nowhere close. Paul's beginning to deal with this idea. The law and promise, are they different? How is it possible to have both? They seem definitely different, if not opposites. How are we talking about them together? Love says everyone is accepted, all's welcome, everyone is loved by God. You just need to see that you're loved and the world would be better. Law has absolute standards. If you don't meet those absolute standards, punishment is coming. Doug, okay, he's about to deal with how do these things fit? It seems like we can have law or love, but not both. Love teaches people aren't free. That's the problem. We just need to accept them for who they are, love them the way God does. If not, there's going to be oppression, and there's going to be control, and there's going to be lousy relationships and lousy society. That's what love teaches. Law teaches people aren't good. They do bad things. They break the rules. They're selfish. They need to be limited and controlled. And the only way to do that is by fear and torment. I want you to understand. This is the cultural war that every society exists in since Christ came. It's one or the other. We're in a time period right now that's exactly what you're fighting over. That's exactly what all of these, everything you see on the news, that's what it's about. Is we going to have law, or do I get to do what I want to do? How dare you hold me accountable? Who says you can? Because it doesn't seem like you can have both. Wolfhart Pannenberg, some of you might have read some of his writings. He wrote the book Systematic Theology. Mike, you might have had to use it in college. He wrote about 15 other books. But he wrote a book that dealt with this idea. The basic tenet of the book says this: in order to have a society, a group must agree on right and wrong. Otherwise, you can't have any cohesiveness. Until about 500 years ago, though, that existed. But that existed. Okay? For the most part, up until about 500 years ago, it was done through religion, the law of God. So you have a basic group of laws. But about 500 years ago, what started was the religious wars in Europe. And they lasted for a couple hundred years. But the religious wars basically were, God's on my side, you're evil. I must destroy evil. And so, with Bible in hand and sword in hand, I went to kill and destroy and maim, and it just went on for a couple hundred years in the name of God. The result of that, Lorraine, after 200 or so years of war, you don't think there were whores? You don't think there was a kid who grew up without his dad, and the reason was God? And there was a widowed wife because God. And so, historically, there was this backlash, which ended up in the philosophers like Voltaire saying, you cannot have a society where there is the absolutes of God. Absolutes of God don't work. And what began to grow is this idea that in order to have a cohesive society, we must believe and teach that all truth is relative. We must all decide what is right for ourselves, and everybody else needs to just learn to accept it, and we need to all get along. Now, you can laugh, but I'm going to tell you that's the sad state we live in right now. That is where we have struggle. And some want to go back and say, well, we just need law. Okay, well, remember the purpose of law is. We just need love. Okay, when do you show grace, principal? When do you show love? How do you match those two things together? Do you understand the conflict? I love this, by the way. You can get this online if you want it. I'll print you up a couple. I've got a couple. It's written by a guy named Author Left. If you've been in church very long, way back in the late 70s, early 80s, he was quoted all the time. That is the God is dead time. Paper, movies. Author Left is an agnostic. He was a professor at Yale University teaching law. He graduated from Harvard. How that happens, I don't know, but first he started at Duke. He actually wrote this when he was at Duke, then amended it when he went to Yale. And he writes this pamphlet, which you can look up in the Yale Law Review today. Since it's so old, 1979, it's a little bit tough, but you can. But he wrote this paper that says, if there is no God, no law of God, then there is no way for a society to ever have a just law or punishment. And that's true. What you end up with is trying to defend why this is right, or why this has cost, or why this has punishment. You know, when we're on the playground, it goes like this. You know, I pick on your friend. You stand up for him. You say, you can't do that. And I turn around and look at you and says who? Because the power of law comes from the speaker, comes the writer. So if you remove God, says who? Says who? Says you? You're going to put that on me? Well, what right do you have to tell me how to live my life? Welcome to our time. Here, I'll make this really relative before I run out of time. See, Treva, I don't know how much you're keeping up with the news. I don't blame you if you're not keeping up with all of it. It's just depressing. Okay, but we could take anyone, but let's take Wisconsin. Mike, we'll take Wisconsin. Okay, what's going on in Wisconsin is man showed up at a place where he's not supposed to be by court order. Law says you can't be there. Says you can't be there because somebody swore out a warrant and said you did things that the law says you can't do. You show up there anyway. They call the police. Police show up. They wrestle you to the ground, you fight them off, they tase you, you somehow elude that. Some words, whatever those may be, it doesn't really matter, not for this illustration anyway. You decide you have no accountability to them, you start walking back to your car, you have a gun, or you have a knife or a weapon, or there's one in the car or something. There's also 3 kids in the car. At what point are you supposed to be allowed to drive off with 3 kids when you've just shown such violent and unstable behavior? But you have this. Here's the 2 sides. On one side, you have law that says he disobeyed, he didn't listen, boom, boom, boom. On the other side, and that's going to be one side, quit resisting. But understand, Dr. Lewis, for that quit resisting side, there's a huge side over here that says, well, all he was trying to do was take care of his kids. All he was trying to do was break up a fight. He was doing good. What are you trying to crucify him for doing good for? What right do you have to hold him accountable, to stop him to? Cultural war. It's where we live. It's the battle of law or love. Well, for me, that's an easy answer. Okay, well, we're left here not just for us. It's not just to get together and agree. We're left here to effect. Doug, that means, you know what? We have to be ready to give every man an answer. We've got to be able to deal with this. That's what Paul's dealing with here. In America, we followed the law of God until about mid-60s. Began to change. We didn't stop it. If you ask me, Dr. Lewis, I'll tell you it started in 1936. This is personally just my opinion. Okay, so I don't put, see how calm I am? This is my opinion. 1936, when a man who is called the father of modern education, John Dewey, who also helped start the Freedom from Religion Association, who was on the board who helped write the Humanist Manifesto, began pumping out teachers who were taught that you can't have absolutes, that everything must be relative, that you must allow man to make his own decision in his own mind. And since 1936, no one stopped it. We stood in our groups and said, they're wrong, nope, 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 and we had no answer for them. And now it's almost 100 years later, and we're seeing the end. In 1979, Arthur Lefter wrote this, and that's what he's talking about. If you say there's no God, said it's all breaking down. I ran out of paper, so I couldn't copy the whole quote. So I just printed it. It's all breaking down. The so-called death of God is not just his funeral, but it has also totally eliminated any coherent ethical or legal system in our country. Neither reason nor love nor even terror seem to have worked to make us good people. And worse than that, without God, there is no reason why anything should do that. And then he goes on to give some illustrations, okay? Nevertheless, we would all agree that napalming babies is bad, right? Right. We would all agree that starving the poor is wicked, right? Right. We would all agree that slavery is evil, right? Right. We would all agree that Hitler was terrible, right? Right. Says who? Give me an argument. If you take God away, where's your argument? Hitler is evil. Why? Because you know what he's going to tell you? His defense is going to say, I saw an evil in the world. I was removing that evil. I was making the world better. Well, you were wrong. Well, that's how I saw it. I was doing the best I could. I had good intentions. Heather, apart from, you remove God from this world, there will be no law. He gave the law. And he also, 1 John 4, God is love. Now, how do you reconcile these? There must be moral law, but it didn't seem to work by itself. And this all is relative stuff, you know, that's not going to work either. In fact, I got a few minutes. Exodus 34. I don't think I gave you these. I did it again. Exodus, why wouldn't you start from the short end and go this way? In Exodus 33, Moses says to God, show me thy glory. God's answer, and he said, I beseech thee, show me thy glory, in verse 18:33. And he said, God's response, I will make all my goodness. Now what did he ask for? I asked for your glory. His response, so these things must be synonyms. I will make all my goodness pass before thee, and I will proclaim the name of the Lord. So here's my glory. It's going to be seen in my name. It's going to be seen in my goodness. Then in chapter 34, verses 6 and 7, he puts him in the rock. God comes by, and this is what he says. And the Lord passed by before him and proclaimed, the Lord God. So here we got his name, merciful and gracious, long-suffering, abundant in goodness and truth, keeping mercy for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgressions and sin. Mike, that sounds pretty much like, yes, love, promise, forgiveness, right? Right here, next. And that will by no means clear the guilty. I'm the forgiving God who won't forgive, visiting the iniquity on the fathers, upon the children, and upon the children's children, unto the third and fourth generation. Here's who I am. I'm the God who loves. I'm the God who forgives, but I will not forgive any. I clear none. Every sin must be accounted for. Every sin must have a payment. This is what Paul's reconciling. How do you bring these two things together? How do you bring law and love right here? Another old guy. I like old guys. Horatio Spanner, preacher in the 1800s, well, not that late, early 1900s, from Scotland. Law and love must be reconciled. The one cannot give way to the other. Can't have one on top. Boom. They are both equally. When God said his name, who am I? I'm forgiving and I'm just. They're equal. You can't make one more important than the other. They have to be reconciled somewhere because both are true. They will always both be true. I am both love and just. I am both grace and holy. Paul, that's what this whole book is about. That's what he's fighting for. But the only answer is the gospel. There is one place. There's one place where love and law come together. And that is on the cross. It is through the substitutionary atonement of Christ, because there sin gets paid for and love buys us back. See, the punishment on the cross was the punishment for sin. The act of going to the cross was the loving purchasing of your and I's debt. Love and law meet. Galatians 3:13, let's see. Acts and Romans and Corinthians. Galatians 3:13, we've already read this. But Christ hath redeemed us from the curse of the law, being made a curse for us. Substitutionary atonement. 2 Corinthians 5:21. For he hath made him to be sin for us who knew no sin, that we might be made the righteousness of God in him. 1 Peter 3:18. For Christ also once suffered for sins, the just for the unjust. By the way, once suffered for sins. God got paid one time. If he ever charged again, that would be unfair. That would be a double payment for the same thing. That's why we don't have to pay for our own sins. Those who have been washed in the blood, sin is covered forever. Christ also once suffered for sins, the just for the unjust, that he might bring us purpose, love. See, there you go. Law, he had to suffer. Love, he might bring us unto God. Last one, Mark 10:45. For even the Son of Man came not to be ministered unto, but to minister, and to give his life a ransom for many. This is what Paul's fighting for, that we might understand that it is the gospel and only the gospel where law and love come together. It's not all law, and it's not all love. They must both be answered for, because they are both part of God's nature, and the only place that can happen is the gospel. And he is going through to defend the gospel with everything that is in him. And that should be the mark of a Christian. We should show forth the face of God. We should show forth his love. We should. But you know how you show forth the face of God's love? Heather, we preach the law. There's nothing more loving than I can do than to show you you are on the road of the transgressed. But there is a way for you to leave the transgressed and be on the road of the promised. And that is the purpose. That is why we're here. That is the answer we're supposed to have. If we march in the civil guard, and if we would just get the schools back, Brother Hamilton, there is one answer for the problems in our society. It's the cross. No, does that mean you do nothing? And does that mean, no. No, we're not in Romans 13. We're in Galatians. And the answer for this world is the gospel, which we should preach. Dr. Lewis, you close in a word of prayer.